Excited to welcome Charlotte Hornets assistant coach Matt Hill to the basketball podcast. Matt Hill brings a wealth of NBA coaching experience to the Charlotte Hornets, having previously served as an assistant coach with the Phoenix Suns, Atlanta Hawks, and Orlando Magic. He began his NBA journey with the Orlando Magic in 2012, working his way up from video analyst, scout, player development coach to assistant coach, under coaches Jacque Vaughn, James Borrego, Scott Skiles, and Frank Vogel. A standout athlete himself, Hill played college basketball at the University of Texas and was named Nebraska's Mr. Basketball and Gatorade Player of the Year in high school. Matt, welcome to the basketball podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So this was fun. When I connected with you, you were in between jobs, and
Yeah.
now you have a job. So maybe take us just through that journey a little bit over the last few weeks.
Yeah, it's been a crazy couple of weeks, but I was with the Phoenix Suns last year for one season, and after being in Atlanta for 5 before that, and with the Magic 6 prior to that, but was told we're not going to be back in Phoenix, and so we're starting to make the calls and connect with our people, and then got in touch with Charles Lee and Jeff Peterson, and really believe in what they're doing over there in Charlotte, and was able to jump on staff with Charles. I think in less than 2 weeks, I was fired and hired, and that's a rare thing in the NBA. It doesn't usually happen that quick. Last summer, I was still searching for a job at this point. During that time, though, I've been out to Charlotte, been around the players. We had some guys working, been around the staff, had Zoom meetings, and this is all while Charles is winning a NBA championship and doing it from afar. It's been really impressive to see from him how he can manage his time and create and just start to create this culture of work and trust and connectivity. But yeah, it's been a little bit hectic. So we had to push the Zoom back a couple times, but we're here. So I'm excited to be on.
I'm excited too, and it's great to get those insights into the journey part of it. And we're happy, obviously, you landed. And we're going to go through a whole bunch of things. And one of the things that stood out to me when I was researching is obviously you did a tour with Liam Flynn in Australia, and you covered a lot of transition concepts. And I just love so much of the phrasing that you used, particularly. Let's start with the 3 phases of the possession: yellow, red, and black zones.
Yeah, this was with Lloyd Pierce and my staff in Atlanta. And Lloyd was really big on terminology and trying to make sure we had talking points for all of our guys that we could reference back. And one that I really loved was some of our transition terminology, which was red, yellow, and black zones. Red being the first 8 seconds of the possession, a transition possession. Yellow being the middle part, the bulk of it, where you might run and get into some sets. And black obviously being the last 8 seconds. And so this is when you are taking the shot or, dominating the possession. And I just thought it was cool because it was a good way for us coaches to organize some film. And a lot of times we would just watch film within those categories, and being organized and being clean with how you show your film and what you're going to show and why on a day-to-day basis is such a big part of the NBA. College, high school, youth, we're very cognizant about that and how to make it make sense for these guys. How much is too much? How much is too little? But I really like the days that we showed clips in that fashion, and you could organize the clips in good transition possessions, successful or not, good continuity possessions where we really moved the ball or played to the second side of the floor or had great spacing or made a paint to great or good to great, whatever you want to call it. And then the black zone, which was, what are we going to do in the last 5 to 8 seconds of a possession? And was it successful? And why was it successful? Was this a good shot? 2 for 1. So you could really get in the weeds with that. But yeah, I really liked the way we did it. And I never heard of that before. I think he might have came up with it in Atlanta. I don't think he brought that from Philly. So I thought that was really cool.
So from your perspective, then maybe let's start with the black zone just to dive a little bit deeper, because I think that's a common question for coaches all the time, especially as more certainly American high schools are transitioning to shot clocks, thankfully. So what are some things that kind of in those end of shot clock possessions, what are some things that bring the most effectiveness and value to a team?
Well, I think just being aware that who we want to have the ball, if it's someone that we can control that has the ball during that time, we'll want them to get the ball. If not, what are some things you can do when the possession has died down and you had ran the set and now we're stagnant. And I think we gave our players a pretty clear understanding of you have 2 or 3 options here. We want our main playmakers to handle, and we want them to handle in space, or we can run into a middle pick and roll, angle pick and roll with our 5, or some sort of small slip or advantage creation. And depending on the game, if we wanted to target somebody or involve somebody in a certain possession, then that would be emphasized, and we would bring that player up as well. So I think it's an awareness that the players are. I reference Atlanta a lot because I was there for 5 years, but with Trae Young, it was pretty clear. We knew that at the end of the shot clock, we wanted Trae with the ball, and we wanted our 5-man to run up in a pick and roll because that was just what we were best at. And so I think keeping it simple helps, having the correct and proper spacing helps, and then making sure you give yourself enough time to create an advantage, which we try to go run in that pick and roll. Maybe it wasn't always perfect, 6 or 7 seconds, just so we could potentially have an opportunity to get downhill and make a play.
So even maybe going back further, it might not be an NBA problem, but I was observing EYBL boys, and they have so many coaches on the bench, but it didn't seem like any of them were ever responsible for communicating late shot clock. So I'm curious, like, what type of strategies have you come through to be able to communicate late clock and then trigger those type of actions?
We really did try to put the onus on the players to have an awareness of that, because you'd be surprised. I think you see it at every level. And in college, I know it was the case too, but in the NBA, they sometimes aren't aware. And so we'd have people responsible for yelling out terms. I'm sure you've heard this. Some teams yell butter. Some teams yell, I think we yelled green for go on one team I was with. But usually you'd have a coach that around 5 seconds would start to yell that out. And if you had your offense in front of you, they might hear it. If they don't, they probably won't. So the players do really have to be like take some accountability on their end for knowing time and score. It's really important. And I think that goes into a lot of different areas of the game too. Time and score. What type of possession do we need right now? Did we just come down and miss 3 jumpers? Do I need to get downhill and get a foul call? Try to get something at the rim, something easy, slow the game down? Did this player just make 2 threes in a row? Do I need to find him? Do I need to run a play for him? So it's hard to teach, but you can, I think, with film and really engaging with the players in those sessions. What do we think right here? What just happened? What's the score? And then what do we need? And you do have to think, though. And sometimes players don't want to think. They just want to play.
No doubt. And jumping back to the 3 phases, the possession, particularly around yellow, because I know spacing is big to you. So let's talk about arrival spacing. Is there a preferred arrival structure in transition, especially in that yellow phase?
I think I've worked with so many different coaches that it's varied with all of them. And we were big in Atlanta on talking about the 4-point line and really giving our players, and Trae especially, the amount of space to get downhill and playing gaps. That was a big thing because we had some wing athletes who could play off kick aheads and attack with space without a pick and roll, without a drag or without a double drag to start the possession. So obviously corner fill, we want those corners filled as much as we can in the half court and in transition, but I think in transition is just as important. And with our bigs, we wanted them to run, but we didn't want them to run without a purpose. And if they had an advantage and they could get a rim run, go ahead and get a rim run. But a lot of times our bigs are being asked to rebound the ball, and we want them to do that. And so for us to say, hey, rebound the ball, outlet it, and then go get a rim run, it's just not going to make any sense. That's when we'd really start our flow, and we would run into a double drag or get into that AB offense. Or if he can make himself work down to the dunker, then get yourself down to the dunker. But if he can get a rim run, get a rim run. And then we'd have our trail big 4-point line opposite of the point guard. So
You mentioned it, AB
Mhm.
spacing. So
Yeah.
I know the terminology changes from team to team, but let's stick with that since you brought it up. AB and C spacing. Can you explain that to us?
I think so. It's been a while.
Maybe even just your concept of kind of
Well,
those things. Yeah.
yeah, with Coach Pierce, it was a way for him to designate how we want to flow into our early offense without putting too much structure and too many rules on it. So A would be the player with the ball, the point guard with the ball, and A to B would be to the trailer, to the trailing big, and then C could be a multiple different options if we got to that. It could be hit the flashing big from the dunker to the elbow, and then we would play off basically split action or second side DHO. But if we said AB, like dribble at was a play. It was basically delay, but AB point guard to the trailing big, and dribble at would be going back to the action where the ball came from. And so it was basically a backside for our wing coming out of the corner. And what was good about it was we ran so much pick and roll with Trey. I think one of the top two or three in the NBA. So it was a way for us to get off the ball and get him off the ball and move our offense a little bit because we knew we were going to play pick and roll the majority of the game. And then we'd have AB backside, which was just going away from the action, hit the trail big, pin down to corner DHO. So I think there's so much flow and freedom of play in the NBA. And I don't want to call it randomness because it's not random, but we allow our best players to play in space and keep it simple. And if we needed to slow them down and move the ball a little bit, that AB spacing was helpful. Yeah,
So it was a communication tool to be able to not just play call, but obviously to be able to give them a structure when they needed it.
absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so many different sets and plays that we had. There was ways that we started to play in terms of terminology there was ways that we wanted the play to finish in terms of not with terminology. Like there was AB dribble at jam. And it almost feels like football a little bit when you start to speak some of the language, but with a young team, it really helped. A jam was just a corner pin in for a shooter. So who it was a slice cut, it was a back cut. If he was under the rim, then he would come out that same side off that strong side corner. You see it a lot. Some people call it mash. We called it jam. And it was a way for us to get our best shooter a shot in the corner, and the big would usually be pinning in. And so we would call AB dribble out jam if we thought Kevin Herter needed a shot. And yeah, again, for a young team, it helped. You don't want to structure it too much, but if we felt like we needed to get somebody a shot or get the ball moving, that terminology was, I thought, helpful.
We know it's variable across teams. And again, you've had experiences with lots of different coaches, but just in terms of your experiences, you mentioned the value of getting them to be able to play in space.
Mhm.
Ball screen was one of those concepts, draw two, create space from that. What are some other kind of best methods that you've found in terms of being able to create space for, say, Kevin Durant last year or Booker or someone like that you've worked with?
I think we don't need much for those players. They're so good, can create an advantage when they have the ball. But a lot of times, like a guy like Kev, he didn't need a pick and roll. And sometimes bringing a pick and roll up to the action eliminated his space and crowded him a little bit. And a guy like Trey was great in a pick and roll and was so fast that he just needed this little inch of advantage. And if he was almost side by side, if you were next to him, you were done. And so I think it really depends on the type of player you have. And that's something that us coaches need to really know and communicate with the players. Hey, Kev, do you want this? Do you want us to bring somebody up? No, I'm good. You don't need to. Just give me the ball here and I'm fine. Or Trey, what do you want in this? What do you want at the end of the shot clock here? What do you want early in transition? Two screens, one screen. And the more you know your players and the more you can communicate that, I think the better. But to answer your question, I think it really depends on the player. I think that you can do it in a bunch of different ways depending on your team. There's so much small stuff these days where the big is spaced, and now your smalls are pick and roll players or pick and pop players or slip outs. And those advantages, I think, are some of the hardest things to guard in the NBA because they create so much confusion.
So
So,
let's talk about that situation a little bit because I'm glad you brought that up. Is that concept of Kevin Durant doesn't necessarily want the ball screen, and there's so many players like that, but we want to get them to the spot they want to be.
yeah.
Not just about getting them to the spot. What are we doing with the off the ball players in those situations where, again, it's Kevin creating the advantage and then playing off the advantage versus one, or he draws two, and now the teammates are empowered? Can you talk to us about that process?
Yeah, I think we did a lot of 3-1 spacing this year, which was if Kev caught it on the wing, a lot of times he liked to play in the middle of the floor at the nail. So again, we would run a little cross screen pin down or a choice. We gave him a choice, cross screen pin down. If he wanted to catch on the block, he could catch on the block, nail. And then once he caught, we got to our spacing. But we tried to get to 3-1 spacing during those possessions if he caught it on the wing. And someone in the strong side corner, usually your best shooter. So you had to honor that strong side corner. There was no overhelp. There was no crowd. You really had to stay connected to that guy, or else it was a quick swing and shot. And 3 on the backside, and then Kevin with the ball. Because really, we weren't too worried about the weak side crowding too much, especially with a guy like him. And again, this is knowing your players, because we know he wanted to get to his spot. And so we just needed some initial space. We wanted that nail defender to be out of it, get that point guard whoever was on the opposite wing really high, really spaced, and give him that really initial thrust to get to his spot. And that really holds true with most of the teams I've been with, that type of spacing when we're in an ISO situation.
Can you
But making
explain?
that clear
Yeah,
is
can you
very
explain a little
helpful.
more the 3-1 spacing just as a
Yeah,
template?
so corners are filled, and if the ball's on the right wing, then the right corner is your best shooter. The the left wing is usually your point guard, and the dunker could be filled, or you could have 3 perimeter players spacing, and your big could be in the corner. You starting to see that a lot too. You saw it with Boston where the big was in the corner and the small was in the dunker. It's just it's all based on your personnel of how you want to space those guys. We didn't feel like we needed to move them too much, but a lot of teams do. You can exchange to try to get that weak side moving and hugged up a little bit on their man so they can't load up to the weak side as much. You can pin in, you can run something for your shooters. You can do whatever you want on that weak side to occupy that low man and nail. A lot of teams run just a simple flare action for that nail. For us, we just wanted to make sure we were properly spaced. And if we were properly spaced, our guys were going to get to their spots. And we didn't want too much movement as the shot was going up and to sacrifice our transition defense too much either. So that's something you have to worry about or think about. But yeah, that's the basics of it. And into quarters, that a lot too.
Awesome. Thank you for diving deeper with that. And
Yeah.
I know you've been in a lot of different roles in the NBA, and certainly player development is near and dear to your heart a little bit in terms of that. So maybe take us through a little bit of the process of developing and organizing and running a player development program for certain players.
I think that's how I got my start a little bit. I was starting the film room. I was a former college player and I could get on the court still with the guys. And so I was really
6'10", right? Which
yeah.
has an
Oh,
incredible value, doesn't it, to an NBA?
it does. It absolutely does. And I'll be the first to tell you that that was a huge advantage for me. It was a huge advantage of how I got the job. And
Because you could simulate bigger players in
yeah,
practice.
that was in with our individual guys and their work. And then I could also jump in and play 3-on-3 or 5-on-5 if the guys needed me to. So it was very important. And then I had to learn how to be a professional too and be in the video room and make edits for our coaches and be organized with those edits and make them make sense and log games. And it was the classic stories of you're there late at night and you're trying to just carve out a name for yourself in this league. So it took a while. It was 6 years almost. It was 5 years in the video room in Atlanta and working my way up to finally head video coordinator and assistant coach there. But it's great because being a video coordinator is, and I'll get to the player development stuff, but being a video coordinator is such a cool role because there's not many people that are in charge of a department within the NBA. And it's a head coach, it's a GM, but a video guy is. And now the rooms are big, so big that you're a manager of 5 to 8 people sometimes. And it's really great experience. You get to really run the room and control the room, and you're responsible for all the good and bad that happens. So I think that was something I really valued. And looking back, it was really important at the time. I didn't know it. But during that time, I realized how important it was for player development to have processes and organization and feedback loops. You can do it as many different ways you want, but I think identifying what a player needs to work on is really important. Having a process in place to implement that, and then providing outcomes or a feedback loop to that player to gauge. And that can be through tracking, it can be through a lot of different things. But I grew up in a world in Orlando where you've heard this, I'm sure, before. We had vitamins every day, and that was a Chad Forcier term that I learned when I was with him. And it's just like taking your daily dose of vitamins every day, and your individual vitamins was 20 minutes maybe on the floor at a certain time, but the same time before practice, after practice. And we're going to talk about what we're going to work on. We're going to do those things every day, and we're going to just foundationally continue to build. What's tricky with the NBA, because to me, player development is, who are you as a player? What are you going to be asked to do for this team? What's your role? How can you really embrace that role and be great in that role and own that role? Because that's what it is. If 3/4 of your shots are going to be corner threes this year, then we don't need to spend 75% of your time on ball handling and finishing. And I think there's a fine line between working and growing your game and really doing what you do well. And so that takes trust, that takes relationships, that takes building, that takes communication with the players. And that, I think, first and foremost, has to be set in stone before you can even have those conversations. And to me, that's done a lot with sweat equity and court time, and just showing up and doing the work with them and being present and being there every day. There's no replacement to that for me as a coach. If you can show a player that you can help them and help them get better and are committed to that, then they'll buy in. They don't really care who you are, if you're a former player or not. They just, can you help me? So once you identify and gauge what the player needs to work on 3 things during the year, and have the processes in place with your vitamins, with your extra time, we called it dessert shooting in Atlanta. Players would come in at night and we would get them their dessert shooting, 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes of whatever they needed to do, especially with a young team. And then proper tracking and feedback loops. And tracking can look a lot of different ways at a lot of different levels. It can be, how many pick and rolls were you involved in, and how many times did you stop a play in that possession? You could put defense, offense. Obviously, shooting is the easiest one to track, but spacing, you can do anything. And then how many times did we work out this month? What did we work on? And what did the pie chart look like? And are we on the right track? So that's a long-winded answer, but
it gives us an insight in terms of how it looks, what it is. And there's a few things that I want to come back to. One is this balance. You said vitamins, daily vitamins. Obviously, I think most people are versed in something like that.
yeah.
But the challenge for you as a player development coach, especially with an NBA season, is the balance between comfort and confidence reps versus loading challenge that actually leads to improvement and development. Can you talk a little bit about that challenge for you?
Yeah, it's with almost every player you work with, whether he's a starter or the 15th man on the bench. Every player thinks that they're ready for more right now. And that's youth players as well. So I think, again, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to initially build a strong foundation with these players. So when you do need to have open and honest conversations about their game, what they need to work on, you can. Because a lot of times, and I worked with a lot of bigs too, it's just not that pretty to work on this stuff. And it's not sexy, it's not fun a lot of times, but it can give you a great life and a lot of money to do two or three things really well. And then we can get to shooting some corner threes. But right now, we need to work on screening angles, and we need to work on finishing, and we need to work on, can you make two or three dribbles out of this delay action? And we have to do it every day. And then we'll work on, and then we'll give you your threes. You want to shoot some threes at the end? No problem. No problem. Two for me, one for you type of deal. You also have to have a feel as a coach too that you can't have it your way all the time. It's just, you're going to lose the player. There's a give and take, and you should continue to work on things. It's just continuing to build and then adding, continue to build and then continue to add. You want to challenge, you want to have fun. I think that's really important, but you want to get better. That's what I want. I want the player to get better.
I love that way of phrasing it. Two for you, one for me, or one for you. Look, the part that I think you've said so is this feedback loop, which I think is the part missing. If I when I go evaluate certain programs and help them highlight certain things that they can improve on, that feedback loop back to the player about this player development is leading to this improvement seems to be one of the things that's missing a lot. And you've highlighted some of the different ideas. For me, the question is, how do you connect the fact that what they're doing in player development is leading to them playing the game better? How do you connect that for them?
It's tough. It's one of the toughest things to track and to judge, especially it's very dependent on the player. Because if it's a young player and he's not playing a lot of minutes, the games aren't going to be your best judge of how they're getting better. So those are the toughest. But say the player is playing enough, I think with how technology is now, and especially at the level we're at, you can track so many different things that, to me, at the end of the day, it's too much information, and it has to be narrowed down. And I think you can do it a few different ways. I think you can always track, how many times did we work this week or month? Did we tackle the three main player development points in those workouts? If so, how much? And then what else do we do? So that's one thing. Are you working, and what are you working on? Okay, that's a check. Second is it translating to the game? And again, for players that are playing, it's easy, but I've worked with a lot of guys that want to try to get to the free throw line more, or try to get their reps up, or their rim attempts up, or their ability to draw fouls. I've worked with some players like that. And so that's an easy one. You can judge that. But you can also pull film and judge, this was a great opportunity to get a low rip or a low swipe, and you didn't do it. And so you can't just look at numbers and say, well, you're not doing it. You have to go back and watch the film as a coach and say, there was an opportunity to do it, but you misread the situation, or you weren't confident enough to go into that play yet. And so I think stats, film, two great ways. Stats during practice. We have a NOAA tracking system. If you want to work on a guy's shot, you can track it. You can look at it. How many shots did you get up this week? How many shots did you get up this month? That's an easy way. But at the youth level or high school level, I think you can keep it really simple. Just, how much are we working? Is it translating to the game from a numbers standpoint and from a film standpoint? If not, then what do we need to change? Because the NBA is just, there's as many numbers and stats as you want to get. It's endless.
It's almost too much information, as you said.
It is. You can lose the forest through the trees.
Absolutely. And the other part that I want to highlight is, if I've been fortunate to watch some NBA player development sessions and talk about the value of guided defense and these simulated small-sided game situations that you put players in. Because again, it's not what we see online with these trainers sharing all these just on-air by yourself type of dribbling moves and dribbling drills. That's not what you guys do.
Oh, no, you mean defense that we present to them?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like you're not just doing these on-air drills in
No.
space. Like it is simulated defense,
Yeah.
simulated scenarios, simulated help, all these different things.
Yeah. That's where we've been fortunate as NBA to have so many bodies, film room, player development coaches that can play and move on the court. A lot of times we'll group players together in low minute workouts, guys that just aren't playing a lot. And we don't want to do a single session vitamin today. We want to mix it up and we want them to make some reads. We want them to think the game a little bit. So we'll put them in situations all the time. And that's why it's so great to have an active body. And we'll keep it really simple. Same reads probably high school kids are making right now. But the reps are the most important thing. And the quality of the reps are important. So we'll put them in a middle pick and roll. And we'll have them read the low man and X out and make that pass, and then they'll play out of it. Or we'll have them run up into a small pick and roll, and we'll give the coaches coverages, and they're going to read those coverages and make simple plays. If they mess up the pick and roll and they have a driving lane, then they take it. And then we'll simulate another low man. And do they have a finish, or do they have a kick, or do they have a strong side kick? So those are the fun pick and rolls, or sorry, player development sessions where, because it can get monotonous just working on your game over and over, 1-on-0. It's not that it just can. It really can.
And it's not that effective according to evidence-based and experiential knowledge. It's just not that effective.
And the players like playing, and they like competing, and they like making reads, and there's more energy. And when you add another player, I usually think it makes the session better. So we do a lot of group work. We do a lot of pairing work, big smalls. Hey, let's work on this pick and roll read, angles, 10 minutes before practice. We do that stuff all the time. I
just want to highlight it for coaches because I know a lot of us online now, all we're seeing is an NBA player in the offseason doing these on-air perfect workout type of videos. But that's not the reality of development, and that's not the reality of development within an NBA setting as well. I just wanted to highlight that. Another thing that I know is very important, Matt, is something that you alluded to just briefly, but the relationship. To develop a player, you need to have this deeper connection, this deeper relationship. So talk to me about how you develop that as a coach.
I think it looks a lot different for people, but for me, it always starts with the trust factor. And it just takes time. It just does. And that's true with any level. And I don't try to convince them of anything early. I don't try to sell them on who I am. I just let the work and myself show up, and however long it takes is how long it takes. That's how I approach it. Because I think players are smart. They're smarter than you think. They can see through any BS. They can sniff through whether you know what you're talking about or not, or if you're trying to sell them a dream. The players I like to work with don't care about that stuff. They care about the work. And so I think building the trust, and the best way for me to do that is showing up for them, talking about a plan, involving them in that plan, having them take responsibility for their own career, and working on the court and building that sweat equity, and challenging them when I need to challenge them, and putting my arm around them when I need to put my arm around them. And as you do, that's when you start to get to know the player is on the court. You start to get to know what they like, what their family's like, what their interests are, or how they're feeling today, or who they see themselves as players. And it just grows. I think it's one of the most special things about this game is building those types of relationships. And to me, it's always been through tough sessions on the court and going through it with them and sticking around and being there 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later, whatever it is. That's how you do it to me.
You reference holding them accountable. And I'm curious, is it as simple as being honest with them? at times, or what is that process of holding them accountable and then keeping things in perspective at the same time?
I think it's just about being honest. And players, it's different at each level, right? Like our level, people are so scared of being honest with players and they don't want to ruffle feathers, or a lot of times players don't want to hear it. That's true too. But I think I know the players that I like working with and the players I have in the past, they want me to be honest with them. And I don't got to yell and kick and scream, but if we have a good relationship, I can tell you that that session was not good enough. Or yesterday, your energy was terrible. What's going on? And so I think you can. I think they want that. I think they respect you if you have enough built up in the tank with them with that relationship. And then you hold them accountable in different ways too. If they're messing up a drill, you stop the drill, you correct them, and you make it do it over again. You can't skip those types of steps to me, but from an individual basis, I think it's as easy as being open and honest with them. And I'd hope they do the same with me.
Absolutely, hope too. And part of all this is obviously connecting player development to the team situations and everything like that. So talk to us a little bit. You're working with some players in the offseason. A lot of the younger players do stay now in the NBA city to be able to improve with the staff. So talk to us about how that progressively builds into the team concepts that you're going to use.
Yeah, I think again, it's really important to communicate these things as a staff, because I know I would have my thoughts if I work with a player. I know a coach would have other thoughts about that same player. And at the end of the day, I really want to know what the head coach feels and thinks about the player, and how does that blend with how we're going to play stylistically. And so having meetings, having open dialogue, having communication as a staff about your team, your roster, their roles, what they need to improve on, where they stand is really important. And I've been with some great staffs that have been thoughtful and forward thinking about that early in the summer, almost when the season was still going on, depending on the team. Here's a map of this guy's summer. Here's where he's going to be. Here's when we want him in the gym. This is his time off, but we want him in our gym working. And here are his 3 main areas of focus, and here are his 3 side bullet points. But for everyone as a staff to know that, I think is really important, because as much as I work with this player, it could be 80% of the time that I'm his main voice, but I don't want to work with that guy every session of every day. I don't think that's healthy for a player. I think having variety is really important as well, and having a different voice and having some freshness to a workout is really important too. So if that coach works with that player, he needs to know what I know and what he needs to work on. And then making sure in the summertime too that, like you said, it's gotten so carried away with some of the drill work and what players are working on a one-on-0 standpoint, to try to pair them together, to try to get them to play, and to try to work on some really simple, basic basketball spacing, defense during the summertime, shooting. It's just, you have to do it. And that's our job. At the end of workouts, we need to do 10 minutes of pick and roll defense and technique. Sorry, but it's important. It's 50% of the game.
So with this new staff now, with this offseason, are you trying to introduce some of those specific concepts with some of the players?
Yeah, we did that when we were in Charlotte. We wanted to be there and get to know the players. That was the most important thing. I still think it is the most important thing. Have some FaceTime, talk to them, get to know them, get some court time with them. It's early. And then, yeah, we worked on some defensive concepts when we were there in June.
It's great. And we started with your coaching journey. So let's maybe, as we start to wrap up, end with your coaching journey, which is a curious question, more or less. And I know you framed it in some interviews, but you in Orlando stuck with basically 4 different coaches, if I'm correct, during your time there, which is very unique, right? A lot of the coaching staff gets removed. So I guess maybe the first question is, what led to your stick with itness in terms of being there? But then maybe the other thing, the value of having been exposed to 4 different coaches in your development.
That's a great question. And looking back, I'm really oddly thankful for those times in Orlando. Sounds weird, but number one, it taught me some resiliency. It taught me what the NBA can be about. And it taught me that half of the battle with this whole thing is your ability to just stick with it and just stay in it. And yeah, you're right. I worked for four coaches, I think, in 6 years. It was great because I got to take something from all of those great minds, take things I liked, take things I didn't like. They were all very different in their personalities and style. But really what it did, which I didn't know until later, it really broadened my network in a crazy way. I worked with 4 coaches, but I worked with 20 assistants. And some of those assistants were Wes Unseld and James Borrego and Mario Ellie and David Adelman and Chad Forcier, Corliss Williamson, Jay Hernandez, great coaches that are still coaching. And the NBA is just, you get recycled. So I just have a really great network of people. I met great people. I love those staffs, but it taught me that keeping your head down, doing a good job, and just staying in this game is not as easy as it sounds. Where I was fortunate was my position, because my first couple of years, I was a low level and low paid person, but had a lot of value. And it would almost be harder to get rid of me than to just keep me and help the next coach along, because I had some corporate knowledge and I knew where to find the stapler and all that stuff. I think then you just, that kind of stayed true. And then Skiles quit, which was a wild journey. And then we hired Frank, and I was with Frank for 2 years. And it's tough though, because you build with a certain staff and then they're gone, and then you start fresh and you have to regain trust and with the new staff. And so it can be a little daunting when they first arrive, but you just take it day by day, and you just try to do the best job you can and stay out of any other unnecessary NBA politics.
You've done a great job since you've now got another job.
Yeah, we got another one in the bank, so I'm happy about that.
That's awesome. And we're so appreciative of you sharing with us. Just tremendous stuff to be able to share and give us insights into not just your journey, but obviously coaching insights that can help us all. Matt, thank you so much for sharing the game with us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the time. That was fun.